their input, and because, wow, maybe they're not ready. Maybe they're not ready for the coming of the Lord at that moment. So, of course, I'd rather put it off, and maybe they don't want it to disrupt their life. Maybe things are, decent enough and good enough that, that they think, well, that would be a disruption to my way of life. But, one of these days, ready or not, that trumpet is going to sound. And, it's got to be that we're ready at that moment. And I think that's the Lord's will, that we would be ready. But, definitely it is the Lord's will. But we've got to have that desire in our heart and that understanding that He will come and not tarry. And, it's going to be in a moment, It's going to be instantaneously. And the sad thing is most people won't be ready. They'll see the Lord in the air, they'll see Him returning, but, the Scripture talks about how they'll weep and mourn, realizing, yes, it is Him, but they hadn't prepared their hearts. So, wow, we've got to keep it in mind always that the day of Christ is at hand. So then it goes on in this chapter of 2 Thessalonians 2. In the 3rd verse it says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." And of course, he goes on to describe that man of perdition who opposes and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And Paul's saying, "Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things?" And he talked about a withholding power. And now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. See, with God, there's always a precise timing. Everything isn't coincidental, as some might think. He's not waiting for us to do this and that, or conditions here on earth. He has it all planned out. He knows the day and the moment when He will appear, and He knows what will happen the moments before and the hours before, the days and years before. It's all in His timing. And it's not going to happen until that moment is right, when He should be revealed. So Paul is writing here to the church that that this would happen, that this man of sin would come into the scene. But first of all, he's telling us in the 3rd verse that that day wouldn't come until there would be a falling away first. And the term falling away means defection from truth or to forsake. The word apostasy comes from the falling away term. And so he's telling them that there would be a falling away. And certainly Paul warned even those that followed him in his ministry that, there would be grievous wolves among them. If you turn to Acts 20, this was some of Paul's last opportunities to be with the churches he had established as he was heading towards Jerusalem. And Acts 20, verse 29 and 30, Paul he's admonishing them. Those at Ephesus came, the elders came to be with him. It was probably their final moments together. And he said in verse 28, "Take heed therefore unto yourselves and to all the flock over the which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers, to feed the church of God, which He hath purchased with His own blood. For I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. And also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things to draw away disciples after them." So he was warning them that he felt it in his spirit that after his departure, and I believe he's talking about his death, that there would be those that would come into the flock to destroy it. Grievous wolves, he called them in this verse here. And he said, not sparing. A wolf enters in to do all the damage that it can possibly do. And he's warning here, and he said also of your own selves, right in among your own circle there of the saints that gather together, that men would arise and speak perverse things and try to draw disciples unto themselves and away from the gospel of Christ. So he's warning them, and he said in verse 31, therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I cease not to warn everyone night and day with tears. And of course he's getting ready to leave, and he said, and now brethren, I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you an inheritance among all them which are sanctified. So he's encouraging them, those final words, but he's warning them here, that telling them what would happen after his departure, and kind of giving them just that warning, so maybe they could prepare and prevent it, or at least themselves stay safe. So Paul did say those words, but we know that events happened even historically, that after the early disciples, the apostles, were dead, we know that there was a departure from the truth of God. And one thing that happened, which brought about a falling away or a defection from the truth, happened with a Roman emperor named Constantine. And it was done in a very subtle way, how he entered in and took control, and the church had been tremendously persecuted up until that point. In many ways, we know that all the apostles, I believe, except for John, were persecuted. Well, they were all persecuted, but they were all had to give their lives, and of course, I know John didn't have it easy either. He was on the Isle of Patmos. He kind of abandoned there, and I suppose they thought that the wild creatures would do the work that the enemies thought was fitting, I suppose. But God was with him on the Isle of Patmos, just as he's with us no matter where we are and what we have to do. But they endured tremendous persecution in the early church, and Constantine came on the scene, and he ended that persecution for the most part, though from what I was reading, that if people disagreed with him, he still wasn't any too nice. Let's put it that way. But anyway, it was 312, and he was getting ready for a battle, and it just seems that as perhaps he wasn't able to sleep or whatever I would think it'd be hard to sleep before going into a place to conquer it. He had a dream, and supposedly in that dream he saw a cross, which was supposed to be a Christian symbol, and he saw this cross as if it were shining above the sun, very bright and very shining, and he heard that voice saying, in this sign conquer, he thought. So anyway, he took heed to that dream that he had, and the next thing I know is he had that symbol that he saw in this dream, some kind of a cross, put on all the shields of his soldiers. And amazingly, he did go on to defeat the enemy in the battle that he faced right after that. It was sort of I suppose it seemed kind of like a miracle. He was outnumbered by the troops, and easily could have lost this battle because they were stronger than he was, but somehow he managed to win this battle, and it's called the Battle of Milvian Bridge, and what happened is the bridge collapsed, and the general that was leading the others, Maxentius, and many thousands of soldiers therefore drowned. So I suppose it seemed like a miracle to him that he was able to conquer and win this battle. And so he thought that this victory that he had won was directly related to the vision that he saw, that vision of the cross and that voice, and this sign, conquer, that he thought he had heard. So anyway, therefore, he sort of adopted Christianity, but the thing was, he really wasn't a Christian. A lot of people can say they are a Christian, but if the fruit isn't there, it does nothing. I mean, anybody can say anything. Politicians are good at, making promises and declaring this and that, but, just because they talk doesn't mean that that's what they really mean and will do. But, he somehow, Constantine then supposed that he was a Christian, though, he wasn't baptized until his deathbed, and then I'm sure it was sprinkling, so, I know this meant very little, but anyway, he considered himself then the emperor of the Christian people, and what he did then, he ended the period of persecution that had been strong against the Christians at that point, and what he did is he made a lot of compromises. The Roman Senate, as he had been fighting against Rome, they welcomed him into the Senate chambers, and the emperors, there were two remaining emperors that were left there, and what else could they do but allow him to come in, and they kind of made him senior emperor, and therefore he was called Augustus. But anyway, so this was quite a strange twist. He considered himself a Christian, and that act of persecution against the church stopped at this point, but it wasn't according to truth or the true gospel. I did look in the World Book Encyclopedia, the year 1993, volume 16, and I just saw this little couple sentences here, and they were talking about Constantine and the effect that he had, and they did say that what he did there in making Christianity kind of like a state religion even, this recognition of Christianity had some unfortunate effects on the church. The writers of this article stated, they said, for the first time, the church attracted many people who lacked the dedication of the early Christians. And it said that the emperors intruded into the internal affairs of the church. So look what happened. It was like a compromise. Yes, the act of persecution stopped, but he embraced a so-called Christianity, and it wasn't of God at all. It led to the building of the Roman Catholic Church. And the story goes on. And again, he tried to be involved in some of the edicts that followed and make decisions and make himself out as a religious figure even. So I believe that what happened here with Constantine, and also we know that in the year 313 that the Edict of Milan was issued, and this was one that stated that there would be religious tolerance. So they were going to tolerate all people, including Christians. But again, what did this do to the church? It really weakened the church, and this led to, I believe, what Paul is writing here in 2 Thessalonians, the falling away first. When, certainly after that point, Christianity became really distorted. Many things entered in that were pagan, and not that it hadn't been happening prior to this, but I believe this really led the way to apostasy and that spirit of compromise. And I know today we've seen it continuing, maybe even more so than ever before. I know I believe in the 60s and 70s, there was this tremendous ecumenical spirit, and many of the churches back in that time were joining up, uniting, and I remember, just as the years went by, before 2000, that it seems like the differences between Catholicism and Lutheranism, for example, became less and less and less. It was quite obvious, and I remember because my husband was raised as a Lutheran, and he went to a Lutheran parochial school, and there was a tremendous separation at that point between the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church. They really discussed that, and